Warning: this episode contains details that some listeners may find disturbing. February 1942. Just a few months after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the coast of California had become fortified, protecting the shores from enemy subs and aerial attacks. On one particular night, most of the residents of Los Angeles were home, asleep, when there was a sudden explosion of anti-aircraft guns. Something unidentified entered the airspace. The night became alive with chaos, but by morning, there was no evidence anything ever entered Los Angeles' airspace. This event, now known as the Battle of Los Angeles, is not the subject of today's episode, but it perfectly represents the fear that the residents of the city had that the enemy could attack at any moment. And as that fear took hold, and the reality of World War set in, local legends and rumors began to circulate that Nazis were hiding in the City of Angels. This is a study of Strange. Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Michael May, and today I'm going to jump right into introducing my guest, Curtis T. Andersen. I don't know if T is your middle initial at all.
It is, actually.
Are you serious?
For real. Yes. It's an old Scandinavian name. It was my great-great-grandfather's first name, and it's not one that you've heard very often. It's spelled Trygve. Trygve. Yeah.
Wow.
Curtis Trygve Andersen.
As I was saying your name, it just felt like I needed to put in an extra initial in there. I didn't plan on that. I didn't know. Trivier, what was that?
Trygve.
Trygve was your middle name. Well, that's awesome. Well, there you go.
Some might call it strange.
Ooh, some might. Here we go.
Yes.
Well, you have been on the show before, and today, this episode's a little different because, here, I'm going to give a little behind the scenes to my listeners, Curtis. Normally, my guests know the topic, or I'll tell them what it is. They may not be experts on the topic usually, but they'll know what it is and generally have a basic idea. I did not tell you anything about what we're talking about today.
I know nothing.
Do you want to guess? Do you want to just take a random guess?
Based on our history, I am supposing this may have something to do with a odd phenomenon that may have happened in the Orange County area, perhaps related to a theme park like Knott's Berry Farm or Disneyland.
That's a great guess. It is not the case, though. That is not what it is. Although I'm going to have to do that, and you'll have to be on because of your life around this. So Curtis T. Andersen is an actor. He's a producer. He's been in the entertainment industry since he was a kid. You now have a store. Is it comic books that you're doing now? Is that right? Games. That's right. Board
games in Portland, Oregon.
And the reason I wanted you on today, Curtis, is because I don't know if you were born there, but you were raised in Orange County in the LA area. You've worked in the entertainment industry since you were a kid in and around the Los Angeles area. You know people from and in and around the Los Angeles area. You have a feel for the heartbeat of Los Angeles. I'm going to say, I hope that's true, but that's
it's all true. It's all true.
I think it's very true.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about some real and some folklore stories and places based around Nazis in Los Angeles.
Oh!
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I lived in Huntington Beach for a very long time, and that is a very prominent place for them right now. It's a horrible thing to say, but it's true. Lord.
It is something that people don't realize about Southern California, because people outside of California think, oh, California hippie is super liberal. And it's like, no, especially places like Orange County, there's a long history of conservatism, of alt-right things. I mean, even American History X takes place in Orange County, doesn't it?
Yeah. And we also had the orange juice woman who got pied in the face because she was against, well, at the time, she was just against gay people. And that happened in Fullerton, California, which is, dead set in the middle of OC.
There you go. So the topics I'm going to cover today is a variety of topics, and that includes a spy ring before World War II involving Nazis, Nazi mansions and compounds, and even a place that legend says that Hitler visited himself in the Los Angeles area. So stick around so you can learn about all these things. And Curtis already looks shocked. This
I
is
am
great.
truly fascinated because this is all stuff that I've never heard of before. This is amazing.
Yes, yeah. And I'm covering a lot.
Is it parts of Orange County you can not see?
And that's our show, everybody. Thank you for no, as I was researching this and writing my notes, I kept getting the song Walking in LA stuck in my head, but with Nazi in LA. Nazi in LA. Yeah, it's terrible, but that's the dorkiness that I am.
That's
All
very
right.
funny.
So, Curtis, in the intro, you didn't hear the intro, but I introduced the show off by talking about the Battle of Los Angeles.
Yes.
Okay. That is its own episode. I do want to do an episode about Battle of Los Angeles because nowadays there's theories that there were like UFOs or spies. There's all sorts of different conspiracies on it now. But it really does set up that there's a fear because we're entering a world war. People are super on edge. And the feeling of everybody started to go against the Nazis. And what most residents didn't realize is Nazis were already in Los Angeles. And this is not folklore. This is very, very real. Curtis even already mentioned Orange County being a hotbed of some alt-right, far-right thinking. And it had started back then. So what I'm going to talk about first is an anti-Nazi spy ring that started in the 1930s. And this should be a show on Netflix. I honestly don't know how it isn't already because it's crazy fascinating.
So what I'm hearing is we're going to develop this show afterwards to be able to sell.
Just
That's
by
the
us
plan.
mentioning it, we own it. So now, even if someone else makes it, we own it. So
I love
we're
it.
set. We're set.
I love it.
Yeah. Nazis were hiding in plain sight in the 1930s. There was an American Bund, the political party organization that was developed to promote Nazism in the United States and spread propaganda about the Nazi party. And they wanted to sway the opinion of Americans to basically start feeling softy for Nazi Germany. They wanted Americans to be like, yeah, let's support them. And they were predated by another group called the Friends of New Germany, which actually had money from Germany went into the United States to help sort of fund this group and influence them in the United States.
This may be skipping ahead, but does this have any relation to the Nazi rally that happened in New York City?
It does. I think that was the American Boons. Yeah.
Okay.
Because they were based in New York, and you've probably seen the newsreels. You even just mentioned it, but they had rallies, they had speeches.
30,000 Nazis in the middle of New York City.
Exactly. And so that was the same group, and they were largely in New York and Los Angeles. And the reason they were in Los Angeles is because Germany saw LA as a focal point to influence American politics, political thinking, also influence the media industry at large as well. So there were Nazi offices, pro-German, anti-Semitic bookstores. One of the big ones was in downtown LA, and it literally, I forget the name of the store, but it literally was like, Jews are terrible, come buy our book. Like, that's the name of the store. And by the way, that's not me saying that. That's me saying there's a store with this. And yeah, it was pretty interesting because LA generally was okay with this. And there were like meeting spots and offices that were public that people could go to and learn more about the Silver Shirts, the American Bund, and all these different organizations that were pro-Nazi. Most of the police force in Los Angeles and Orange County leaned into the more Nazi ideology, and everybody was pretty much against communism. And so they saw Nazis as like, we're pro-Nazi because we're against communism kind of thing.
Color me surprised. This is my surprised face.
Yes, there you go. You're so surprised. So it turns out that Los Angeles was home to about 1/3 of disabled veterans and that had lost their benefits during the Depression, and so they were not happy with the Roosevelt administration. The area also had 50 German-American organizations with 150,000 members.
Oof.
There was also a lot of Ku Klux Klan membership in SoCal, Orange County, and I already mentioned law enforcement members were generally a part of that, or at least thought they were good.
Some of those that workforces are the same that burn crosses. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Good grief.
There you go. There you go.
Good grief.
And then, so this is all to set up that along came a Jewish veteran, also a lawyer, named Leon Lewis, who decided to take on the Nazis himself.
Good for him. Good job.
And I will tell you that this is my source for this is coming from a book called Hitler in Los Angeles: How Jews Foiled Nazi Plots Against Hollywood and America by Stephen J. Ross. And I'm not going to go into the whole thing today because I'm going to dive into some other subjects. But it is a great, great book. I really enjoyed reading it. And Stephen J. Ross, I think he's a professor, but he found all this information because not a lot of it's public. He found it through records at UC. It was either UC Davis or Fullerton or whatever that had all the original records.
Wow.
And so he was able to research this and put all the pieces together and the people and the players and find all this out. So according to the book, Leon Lewis knew from years of monitoring the foreign press that Germany wanted to grow groups in the U.S. to strike when appropriate. And the U.S. government was more focused on communism than fascism. Lewis put together his own spy ring. And again, this should totally be a TV show. Not to go on that tangent, but it would be so good. And the spy ring was essential to infiltrate Nazi groups in and around Los Angeles. And who he used were Germans, German immigrants. And a lot of the people he used were German immigrants that had fought for Germany in World War I. And he did that specifically because they understood the fears and the dangers of fascism, but also they could infiltrate the group because the group would be like, oh, you're one of us. You fought in the war and you're a German. And so it's easier for these people to get into these groups undercover, not even undercover because they're playing themselves. They'd go to these parties and stuff with their family and whatever.
Yeah.
But here's what they uncovered. And again, I'm skipping a lot because I don't want to give away the book and there's so much to it. But here are various things they uncovered. They found multiple plots to lynch film producers like Louis B. Mayer, Samuel Goldwyn, actors like Charlie Chaplin.
Oh.
There were plots to use guns just to go into places like Boyle Heights, which was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and just maul down the neighborhood, just open fire with machine guns and kill as many Jews as they could.
Jeez.
Yeah. There also were plans to use fake companies to go to Jewish homes and then go inside and kill the family and leave. Sort of like a plumber van would show up in the front yard. And so the neighbors wouldn't suspect anything was wrong and they'd go in and kill the families. There were plots to disrupt shipping in the port of Los Angeles and the port of Long Beach. And there were plots to blow up munition plants in San Diego. All of these were foiled by this spy ring.
That's
all
amazing.
Of them. Isn't that amazing? That's so amazing. Incredible.
And this also really points to the fact that this was in the 30s, right?
Yeah.
So this is before we even got into the war. This was before things like the concentration camps became publicly known.
Yep.
Like, they were really, really trying. Like, it was abundantly clear. Let there be no mistake. Eliminating the Jewish people was on the docket. And
from the beginning,
there is no apology. Anybody who says different is wrong, clearly wrong.
Yes, and that's part of fascism. Fascism is a very nationalistic view. It's a very racist view of politics, where you typically want one party rule, and the way that you keep that one party rule is everybody else's opposition. Everybody else should be killed or in jail or put down, and there was a lot of racism behind it.
Right.
And there you go. The spy ring, specifically, you brought it up. I forgot to mention, it started in 1936 is when he first put it together. And it lasted all the way through the end of the war. So 1945 that it kept going. Yeah. And again, I'll put links to the book in the show notes. It is worth a buy. It is worth a read. If you like history, if you like crazy stories, crazy real stories. The reason I wanted to start the episode mentioning the spy ring, Curtis, is I do think that even if it wasn't very public that there was a spy ring, that's still, those kind of feelings are being ingratiated into the city. Fears of Nazi, both pro-Nazi and fears of Nazis are all kind of combining, and they're influencing everybody, the feeling of the town. And it could have influenced some of the folk tales that have come up with two very real places in Los Angeles that are still to this day considered Nazi compounds or Nazi locations.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm going to start with one called the Murphy Ranch. Have you heard? I feel like you would have heard of the Murphy Ranch.
Now this is where my brain
Yeah.
clicks in, and I get confused about things because there are a lot of ranches
There
that
are,
we've
yes.
both worked on. Yes, whether it be Warner Brothers or like the
Are you thinking of the one
the
where
Manson family
Manson one?
ranch?
That's
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So I am not sure about Murphy Ranch. Yeah.
Okay, so the Murphy Ranch, the legend tells you. I'm going to tell you what the legend says. It is a compound that was built for Nazis, where the people that were there could live off of the grid, take over the city, take over Hollywood, and some tales say that it was being built for as a mansion for Hitler.
Oh wow.
The ranch itself it's just like a home. They never finished fully building it, but it's in a place called Rustic Canyon in the Palisades,
Oh.
and you can hike to it. And literally just a week or so ago, my wife was listening to the Conan O'Brien podcast, and Tom Hanks brought up the Murphy Ranch and says he was riding his bike near it, and it's a Nazi. He's even talking about it being a Nazi compound, and it was built for Nazis back during the
Like,
war.
are there Nazis there right now,
No.
Michael?
Sorry, let me.
Okay.
Not built during the war,
Okay.
Nazi compound back then.
Okay.
Thank you for making me clarify that, by the way. But even like Tom Hanks is talking about it as like, oh, it's this place where Nazis lived. But none of that might be true. So here, I'll read you a little. I'll read
Yeah, I
you a
was going
little
to say,
tale.
where did
Yeah.
this come up? How do people get the idea that Nazis were in this spot?
I
And
will
then
tell you. And this was fascinating to do. I'll give a little anecdote first. I first heard about this when I moved to LA, and I've seen programs like on TV, like KTLA will have like, a series that they go out and they go to like I think it was actually Lost LA, which is a great PBS series. Um, and they went there and talked about its relationship to Nazi history. I've seen other like documentaries that mention it or go there. There's a million YouTube videos you can pull up, and people like, because I don't think you can actually, I don't think you're actually supposed to go where there's like a home and stuff. I think you're supposed to stay off that and just be on hiking trails near it.
sure.
But people, of
We
course,
follow
go in
rules.
there. Yeah.
Everything's fine.
People
Yeah.
go in there, they film. There's ghost hunting videos because, oh, Nazis were here. A lot of people believe that it is a ghost thing. A lot of people believe that it is associated with Nazis. So here's this tale. Not far from Santa Monica, hidden in the hills of Rustic Canyon, are the remnants of a bizarre property known as Murphy Ranch. Built in the late 1930s, the ranch was funded by a mysterious couple, Winona and Norman Stevens, who believed in the coming of a fascist revolution, but they weren't acting alone. The Stevens were allegedly connected to a German man named Herr Schmidt, who convinced them to build the ranch as a self-sustaining Nazi compound. Plans included a powerhouse, water tank storage, even a bomb shelter, and their vision was to ride out the collapse of American democracy and help establish a Nazi stronghold in the U.S. Rumors exist that neighbors in the 1930s witnessed uniformed men dressed similar to the Silver Shirts, an American fascist group, patrolling the property. But in 1941, their dream fell apart. The attack on Pearl Harbor turned public opinion sharply against fascist sympathizers. The story goes that the FBI raided the ranch, and it was abandoned shortly after. Today, graffiti-covered ruins and whispers of secret meetings are all that remain. Dozens, if not hundreds, of YouTube videos exist where people visiting the Nazi compound. Hundreds of articles over the last 80 years say the same thing. But here's the twist. Herr Schmidt? He may not have existed at all.
It was such a stereotypical name. The second you said it, I was like,
Schmidt.
is this the Red Skull?
Yep.
Are you seriously pulling a comic book villain out of your hat on this?
Yeah, historical records suggest that he might have been a scam artist or a cult leader exploiting the Stevens for his own gain. All right. So I do want to also a call out to my listeners. If anybody knows that the Murphy Ranch got burned in the fires, I would love to know, because it's in the Palisades. It might be completely gone now.
I'll be honest with you. I'm looking it up right now as we talk about it. There are current photos that show that it's still standing, but it does say that it is currently temporarily closed.
Okay. Got it.
Now,
got it.
I don't know if that means at some point it ever becomes open.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think they closed it to the public a while ago, but still, Yeah, it's right in the Palisades where the big one of the big fires just went through. So it may not be there anymore, but it is cement. Maybe some of it's still there.
Right?
We'll find out. We'll find out. All right. So the tale started because of an affidavit from a gentleman named Dr. John Vincent in the 70s. He was a professor at UCLA and the director of the Huntington Hartford Foundation, which was an artist retreat that occupied the property after the war. They had bought the property in the 50, I think 1950 exactly is when they bought the property. He tells of a story visiting the property in 1948. He met Winona and Norman Stevens, and they were talking to him about selling to the Hartford Foundation. And allegedly, Winona was a Chicago heiress with a deep interest in the esoteric, or a lot of new age sort of stuff.
Sure.
And he had learned from them that they had met a man named Herr Schmidt, who was from Germany. And he was telling the Stevens that Germany's going to win. There's going to be a world war. Germany's going to win. And he convinced them to build a self-sufficient place to live that could be part of this national socialist ideals. You can live there and be off the grid and be Nazis. And the reason they believed him is because they had a son who apparently was sick and normal doctors weren't really doing a lot. And Herr Schmidt somehow healed him through the power of whatever it may be.
Oh my
And
God.
so they believed him and believed everything he said because he helped their son. And so they started building this property. The property never hit its full potential or planned construction. There are a lot of drawings that date from 1934 to 1941, and they're housed today in the Lloyd Wright collection at UCLA's Young Research Library. And not that Lloyd Wright designed the place, but that's the library they're
That's just a
housed in.
place in
Yeah,
the library where lots of architectural things go.
exactly.
So, yeah.
And they designed a home. They designed, like I already said it earlier, but they designed like little other places to grow food. And there was a power building and an outhouse. And they never finished all of it. They just kind of finished one of the main buildings.
Yeah, seeing the pictures that are available online, there's a lot of like half-built things,
Yes.
even in
Yes.
the ruins of just half-built things.
Yes. And they would even like change designs. They spent a lot of money on this. They would like design it and then, what if we do this? And they'd have like a new architect come in and like design a new thing. So from census records, it does seem like Norman and Winona are real. Like they're not part of this folk legend. They are real people. And Winona did come from a wealthy family, but they met in Pasadena, not Chicago. And yeah, sorry, you look like you're
Pasadena,
gonna
Chicago, same
same
diff.
thing, same
Same
difference,
diff.
same difference. And so it turns out what is possibly true and most likely true is they met a healer named Conrad J. Andersen. Ooh, one of your relatives,
Crap
perhaps.
in a hat. Does he spell it right? That's the big question.
Yeah, it's Anderson.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
those guys are frauds.
Yeah. And he was Norwegian, not German, by the way. So he was an American, which might have led to some of the rumors because Americans, we just hear an accent and like, oh, you must be German or whatever.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the family, like I said, with the Schmidt thing, the family believed him because he healed their child, healed with quotes, healed their child. And so quickly you can find out he was not named Schmidt. He was named Andersen. And he would tell people that he could heal people from the magic of his fingertips. And he had this weird electric charge that he could, influence people or whatever. And he convinced them to build this place to be off the grid. I don't know if he said Nazism is good. It sounds like he was just like, you should build a compound.
He was like, I need a compound and you have money.
And that's what I believe happened. I think you're dead right, Curtis, because apparently, according to the children of the Stevens, he was a womanizer. And whenever they would see him, he'd be on the compound with multiple women. And
I mean, it just keeps the cults in Los Angeles. They just start coming and they don't stop coming.
you can't stop it. It's part of the lifeblood of the town. And yeah, there's very much like this Manson feeling with him. He's very influential in the way he treats people. He has a lot of women coming and going and staying with him, and he would live on the property while it was being built. And he had a lot of influence with the Andersons over how they were spending their money on the property. And
the Stevens?
The Stevens, excuse me. Yeah. The Stevens were the people who live there. So I'm trying to find in my notes. At one point, one of the Stevens kids mentioned that Andersen at one point wanted to poison the Stevens after he had gotten them to sign a will and leave all their money and property to him. That never happened, but that apparently was his plan.
That
So,
tracks. That tracks with the cult leader
oh,
formula.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so he was not a good dude. And at some point during the war, it sounds like they did separate themselves from him. Now, why Herr Schmidt? I don't fully know. I don't know if anybody will fully know how
It
that
was
rumor
probably
got
less
started.
embarrassing to say that we got duped by Nazis than it was to say we got duped by,
So maybe the
by a
Stevens were
faith
part of it.
healer.
They might have started the rumor, like, oh, it was a
Right.
German guy that got us into this mess. Yeah. No, there is an article. Curb LA did a bunch of research into this story, and they had an article that mentions there was a Herr Schmidt in Los Angeles around the time of the war. And in 1940, he was arrested. And so it was a different guy. He wasn't on that property. He actually may have been in Orange County, I believe. And the US Naval Intelligence raided his home and arrested him. We don't know much more, but because that was in the LA Times paper, that name could have just gotten sort of trapped into this
Mixed
cycle
into
of
the, yeah.
rumors and stories. So that could be one of the reasons. So that article about Schmidt, and then the affidavit from this Vincent guy in the 70s telling the story of Nazis at the compound, this is the beginning of the spiraling of the local legends that Nazis were there. And it didn't help. There's a writer named Betty Lou Young who wrote a book who used the affidavit as her source. So she was like, oh, it's this place and Nazis lived there and it was guarded. It was being built for Hitler. That starts spreading the rumors. There's a historian named Randy Young who then also started telling the stories of, oh, there were Nazis in LA. This is like throughout the 80s and
This
90s.
game of telephone just keeps
Telephone.
getting worse.
And I think the reason I'm even covering this on this crazy episode I'm doing on my podcast is that's what I love finding out where the game of telephone starts and where do these stories come from. And Randy Young, I'll mention, the historian who spread the story forever. I think I've even seen interviews on PBS here locally with him talking about it over the years. He now has done enough research and come across enough historical truth that he's now like, oh, we were wrong. There were Nazis there. Sorry, not actually what happened. So, but the myth is still going, including Tom Hanks claiming, oh, I drive by this place and apparently Nazis lived there and built it and stuff.
That's wild.
Yeah,
That's wild. All because some dude just wanted to bang people in the hills.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So that takes me to my next location, the next area of local folklore. This one I would not be surprised if you've never heard of, because it's less well known, but kind of similar to the Murphy Ranch. First of all, do you know, and you may not, even though you're from the LA area, do you know where Shadow Hills is?
Oh yeah, totally. No, I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shadow Hills is a little community, sort of near. It's kind of like westish of La Cañada. It's if you go from Sun Valley, which is north of Burbank, like
Yeah.
through the mountains there. That's where Shadow Hills is.
Oh sure. Okay,
Like,
I do
yeah.
actually know that area. I did not know it was called Shadow Hills.
I did not either until researching this, by the way. Even though I have a direct connection to this place, I didn't even know. So the next segment, what I'm leading towards, is a place called the Furst Castle, Furst, Furst Castle in Shadow Hills, just in the northern part of the Los Angeles area. And I have a personal connection to this place because I had never heard of it, but I was working on a project, actually projects, with a production company that was based in Sun Valley, which is just north of Burbank. And every now and then we would take one of the roads out behind the office into this canyon road. You don't feel like you're in LA anymore. It very quickly becomes very rural. There's homes that have horses in the yard, and like they have little ranches and stuff. And so, yeah, you don't feel like you're in LA anymore. But right up that road, there's a little Italian restaurant, and it's inside this German-styled looking building. It has like a windmill out front. There obviously used to be like a pool or something, or like a riverbed kind of built into it. It's very like, you want to put on your, what are those shoes, like the heavy wooden shoe things, like
The clogs.
the clogs. Yeah. It makes you want to do that, maybe yodel and the hills or whatever. It's it has that very stereotypical German feel. And it's in that restaurant where we would go to lunch sometimes that I first heard that property, both a mansion up above it known as the Furst Castle and the restaurant itself, were part of a Nazi sympathizer ring during the war.
Was that old restaurant called Old Vienna?
Yes. Yeah, it was
Yes.
Old Vienna was the original name. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What I first learned about this place, this castle, is that not only was it home to Nazi sympathizers, but it had secret tunnels and a German cemetery where German spies were being buried when they passed away. And according to legend, Hitler secretly came into the country during the war to have meetings with his American cohorts at the Furst Castle in Shadow Hills in Los Angeles,
Okay, where
California.
did these tunnels go? Because that
Good
instantly
question.
leads to yeah.
No one knows, but they do suspect that it like connected. So the restaurant is down at the base of a mountain. The castle is up above on the mountain. So the tunnels were, I think, secretly just a way to get to and from without having to drive up the complicated road. Probably led to some other little secret hideouts. Some of the legends claim that there was like a radio on top of the castle that would communicate to German subs out in the
Mm.
on the Pacific. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. And so here's the story, Curtis. The story goes that a German immigrant and former German military officer named August Furst moved to the area around 1936, and he quickly opened the Old Vienna Gardens restaurant in a German-styled building. And by 1939, there were complaints, which you can find records of. I've read many newspaper articles from the time about it, where there were complaints that the restaurant would get very rowdy and noisy at night, and neighbors would complain about it. Now, at the time, people claimed that Furst was a Nazi sympathizer, and the
Okay.
property was being used to hold Nazi meetings. Furst himself was a spy, and then came the rumors that they had built tunnels and caves into the mountain behind the restaurant, and they would communicate with Nazi subs. Uniformed men would roam the property for protection, and everything was guarded by gates and dogs. And soon during the war, according to legend, Furst built this Moorish-styled castle on the mountain above, and built also a cemetery to house fallen German spies during the war. Now, keep in
nothing
mind,
says secrecy like, here's my German spy cemetery.
Here
Would
it
you
is.
like to see
Yeah.
the spies that were here?
that we're burying. Also, you do have to, I will say, feeding into the rumors of the time, you do have to keep in mind we're coming out of a depression. And yet, this guy who owns a small little restaurant in Shadow Hills, which is not very populated, is building this giant house on a mountain. So, where's that money coming from? I think that's leading into the speculation of what's going on here.
Sure.
And after the war, the Furst continued to live there until the 1970s. And there's a lot of local history, a lot of local records to look into. The restaurant changed hands multiple times. Today, at least the last time I went, it was an Italian restaurant. And the property is still there. I will add, I have been to the castle, not just the restaurant. I went there on a film location scout for a movie and got to explore it. You can rent it out. I think skateboarders go up there because the pool is empty, so use the pool to skateboard. Yeah. It's a fascinating property. I did not find any secret tunnels, secret rooms, or hideaways. There is like this weird room on the roof that I think was a sauna at one point.
Sure.
It's a fascinating
You mean
property.
the radio room for the subs, Michael.
There you go. Sorry,
yes.
Let me... Yes. All right, so...
You got to pay extra for the tunnel tour.
I guess you do. It's not part of renting it out for a film. So, like the Murphy Ranch, this has the feeling of local tall tales, right? And I love that. And so, through a lot of research, I think I have pieced together what may have happened and where these stories come from. And I'm not pulling one over on the audience. There were no Nazis there. That is my belief.
It's almost relieving, actually, so far that these two major spots where Nazis were supposed to be ended up not actually having Nazis. That's actually nice.
It is a nice thing. I will say. I think I wrote a sentence about this. It might be a nice little cliffhanger here, even though I'm not cutting to a commercial break. So while that might seem nice, Curtis, the truth does point to something far darker.
Oh, crap in a hat, Michael.
Human nature in the neighbors at the time. Maybe not. Maybe that's taken it a little too far. But okay, so Shadow Hills. It turns out like Orange County, a lot of Klan.
Oh, no.
There were Klan meetings in some of these centers built around there. And actually, there's a giant cross that, at least last time I was there, is still there, or at least it's been rebuilt. The history of that cross may have led to the rumors that there was a cemetery on the property. It's actually not on the property of the mansion. It's like next door or nearby, and it looks like it could be the same property. And I think it's right next to a church. That giant cross was put there by the Klan I think in the 1940s, because they were holding meetings and it was a way for them to give back to the community, build this big giant cross. Aren't we good Klan members? And and the
Good
fact that that
grief.
cross was there, at least until the last time I was in the area, is pretty terrible. It also turns out that the speculation that Furst was a Nazi sympathizer was basically because the sympathies had turned against Germany very quickly when the war started. So the complaints about the restaurant essentially stem from that. There were people complaining. You can find newspaper articles about it, where Furst himself is talking to like the LA Times and LA Weekly and all the other local newspapers, saying a lot of the claimants aren't even neighbors. They don't even live there. And it's essentially just because they were like, oh, it's a German that owns a German restaurant. We need that shut down. So they'd
Wow.
complain that he was super loud and they're getting rowdy at night, all this kind of crazy stuff. So that's what I mean by darker side, is that neighbors are turning against a neighbor just because he's German. Yeah.
It always comes down to racism.
And so we like to turn against. We're humans. We don't like people that are different than us. And that's
Good
what
grief.
happens.
Good grief.
Yeah.
As Frankie, who went to Hollywood, once said, when two tribes go to war, one is all that you can score.
Ooh. Yeah. What did he say that in?
The song Two Tribes.
Two Tribes. Okay.
Yeah.
I would think I have to hear that song to remember it. So first, I did write down, I gave a few quotes from newspaper articles, but we've essentially already covered it. He was claiming the the complaints are coming from people that didn't even live there. And he was given permission by the courts to like get his own witnesses together before he went to court with these people. He and his wife told a reporter in the 1970s that the Nazi rumors grew when they allowed war movies to be shot on the property, including people dressed as German soldiers and German tanks being on the property after the war. And that fed into the rumors that, of course, over time it snowballs and it was like, oh, yeah, there are Germans there. So here's some of the truth that I've been able to piece together. They lived on the property until the 1970s. I don't think German spies would have necessarily done that.
Yeah.
They sold the house because it was a very costly house to have. It was too much of a burden to take care of. So they sold it. Another bit of information, Curtis. The first kids fought in World War II for the United States.
Well, that's good.
That is good. And also, but again, if they were German spies, I mean, who knows? Maybe their kids are like some conspiracy theorist is going to claim their kids were spies too then, but that's not the case. They were very proud Americans. Furst had also lived in America for like 30 years before the war. It's not like he had just like came over 10 years prior to World War II starting. And also, the most important piece of information, I was trying to figure out when the castle was built, because it was built after the restaurant and some of the other little homes on the property.
Right.
It was hard to figure out, but it turns out it was built after the war.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah, really hard to have Hitler meeting you there.
Yeah, when there's not even the place that exists. No tunnels have been found or anything like that. So none of the stories seem to line up that this guy is a Nazi sympathizer. And the story behind all of that seems to be just legends of intrigue and interesting Los Angeles local stories.
Now, not to tie this too deep back into the entertainment industry, but is the Furst family at all related to, Griff Furst, don't you? Griff Furst?
No. Who's that?
He's a producer and filmmaker. His dad was in Animal House.
Oh no!
And was an actor for a very, very long time, a character actor.
Yeah,
Do we know if they're related at all?
I don't, because I didn't even look that up. But that is an interesting thing. Maybe I'll do that when we finish, and I'll add a little postscript if so. Or you're doing it right now?
I am totally doing it right now.
No, I don't think he is, because it looks like his dad, who would have been August 1st's son, was born in Virginia. So I don't think,
never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Well, that's a tenuous connection. Print the legend. Michael.
No, if there's anything to learn from this story, and I'm about to ask some questions here about that, but it is that rumors start very easily. And even if we're joking about him being related, someone could pick that up and make a comment. That comment spins into a story. That story turns into a newspaper article that no one fact checks anymore. We do live in a post-truth society, so I feel like it's easier for these things to spread. Yes, so bad things happen, but local legends you don't always have to believe. And it is more, I always think that truth is more fascinating than fiction.
It really is.
And these stories, to me, it is more fascinating that something like the Murphy Ranch or the Furst Castle you think is associated with Nazis during the war, and then you find out they weren't. And that to me is it's fascinating if they were associated with Nazis, but to me it's more fascinating the stories that have happened.
Yeah, their actual stories are actually so much more interesting. Like,
Yeah.
Nazis is the boring part.
Yes.
Because when we get into sex crazed cult leader at Murphy Ranch, like, there is so much more to tell to that. Like, what was the kid suffering from? How did he convince them that he was healed? Like, what actually healed? Did he remain healed, or did he actually just get sick again? And
Yeah.
then when it comes to the castle and stuff, like, just anti-German sentiment,
Yep.
totally what I meant.
Yep.
Yeah, just having that be like the core of it all, and then it's just a family. It's just a family with a
It's just a
restaurant.
family trying to live, trying to run a business. Also, the questions around like money, because I do think that went into like, oh, he could be a spy because where's he getting his money from? Shadow Hills is still not that expensive when you compare it to the rest of Los Angeles area. So definitely at the time it would have been less expensive.
And you used to be able to build a house like
You used
out
to
of
be
a
able to build a
Sears
house,
catalog,
and also
legitimately,
yeah,
like, not even a joke. Yeah,
absolutely. And I did look up property records and like permitting stuff that you can look up with them. And it looks like it didn't all happen at once. This was a very time consuming piece of property. So it's not like they just splurged and spent a bunch of cash. Like they're slowly kind of building things on that property above the restaurant and adding to the restaurant, all this kind of stuff. So it happened. And then they sold it because they were like, this is getting really expensive to live
it's
here.
too much house.
This is way too much house. The kids are gone. And that was a thing, is they wanted a place that the kids could live, like all their kids could grow up and live. And they didn't. They didn't all live there. So it was like, man, time to move on. So there you have it. And I do want to, before we go, we already mentioned it a little earlier, but part of wanting you on this episode is my own personal theory with how these legends start is because LA, Orange County, Southern California does have a history with Nazis. And that's why I talked about the spy ring to start us off. So yeah, tell me about it doesn't have to be specifics. I don't want you to get in trouble with anybody, but like growing up in Orange County, did you ever come across skinheads, or did you come across people that had used to be part of some kind of like far right political ideology or things like that?
This is where it gets a little disappointing. So I moved to Southern California in '85,
Mm.
and we moved immediately to Orange County because my dad's job was in Fullerton. And in the mid '80s and through the '90s, Orange County was definitely still pretty pale, but it was going through a progressive movement. And so um, a lot of what I would find out about later, especially when it came to skinheads and neo Nazis and things like that, actually went underground. Because at the time, there was the two tone movement that was coming out of ska in
Oh
England.
yeah.
And so they had adopted the skinhead
Yep.
as a way to like eliminate the idea of the neo-Nazi.
Yeah.
And ska music in Orange County was becoming a huge thing, and we see that with the eventual rise of, like, in the '90s when we got Real Big Fish and Save Ferris and No Doubt, who like just dominated the scene out of that, what was coming out of the mid '80s and early '90s. And so when I was growing up, the idea of racism was actually really weird, and we didn't and we I didn't see a lot of it.
Yeah.
But then in college, I started to hear about the undercurrents of things that were going on, and this was '95, '96, '97. And anytime you start to see financial hardship or there's massive social change or anything like that, and you start to see people panic and look for things that they feel like they can count on. That's when we started to see those things come back.
Mm-hmm.
And so it used to be a joke that you'd go to Main Street, Huntington Beach, and I'm very pale. Even when I lived in Southern California, mayonnaise was darker than I was. So I never really felt it. But if I was even with friends that were just tan, sometimes you could get some looks. And that only really elevated as we got deeper. And I lived in Huntington Beach for a really long time, and didn't notice much of anything until the 2010s,
Mm-hmm.
when it really started to kick. And then, not to get too specific about it, but around 2016 or 2016, that's when things really started to happen. And that's when there were like alt-right movements on the pier, and people of Hispanic descent started to be chased out of restaurants and getting yelled at by patrons. And racism was not put in check the way that it was when I was growing up as a kid. So it's kind of interesting to see how sometimes it feels like we were in a better spot, and this could just be ignorance of youth, before. And I'm hoping that what we're seeing right now is the extinction burst of this ideology that race matters, or that sexual orientation matters, or that how you identify matters, and that we can all just get down to, you know, respecting people as people, and not worrying about what they do in their spare time, unless it's horrible and evil, in which case really don't do that, and
Yeah.
to away with you. But yeah, it's a weird thing. LA folks always used to look down on Orange County as a region. And when I was a kid, I didn't understand it. As I got older, I started to see why they would have those feelings. And
Yeah.
now, especially with spots like HB, it, they really bring it on themselves. So it was interesting. I'm grateful to be in Portland right now.
Yeah, Mr. Portland now. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very true. No, it's I really have more of a I guess I'm looking at this at more of a historical perspective, just as it relates to me researching this episode. Because when I was looking at that spy ring and I was reading that book, it was scary to think about how many people would have sided with Nazi Germany, to me. And it's really interesting how that didn't happen with America. And that's
Right.
a whole other thing that I'd have to read about and whatever to find out that thing. But especially in Los Angeles, which again, even at the time was considered relatively progressive, because you had all these, crazy entertainment people out there.
Right.
But there was a big contingent of uh, very ultra conservative. If you look at the spectrum, I hate the right left spectrum because I think everything's more cyclical than right and left, but they're far out there. And the spy ring book, was so fascinating because when Leon Lewis, the lawyer who was like, I'm going to have to do this myself because the government isn't helping me, when he would go to the police and the sheriff's office, he'd have literally the authorities be like, nah, I'm not worried about those Nazis. We got to
Yeah.
worry about is those commies, right?
Yeah.
And like weren't worried at all. And it's like, meanwhile, he's like, you guys need to look at what's happening in Europe and see what's going on. And they're trying to do that right here, and they're trying to influence people right in the city, and we have to do something about it.
Well, I
Yeah.
think when something is so horrible, and I don't say that lightly, and I don't exaggerate, when you see something so horrible, you can't imagine that it would ever affect you directly. And you don't even just see that with social movements. You see that when people think about the ideas of like cancer or other serious illness or um, sudden death or car accidents or anything. Like, you never imagine that it's something that will be able to affect you. Because if you did, the overwhelming existential dread of the world would be crushing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you know, when you know people, you never want to assume that they could be the freaking worst, right? And
Yeah.
we see that a lot with family members who are maybe on the other side of a spectrum. Um, you never want to think that your family could be somebody that you disagree with so strongly, or could think that bad things happening would be good. I don't know how to be more general than that.
Yeah. No, but I mean, honestly, and I hate to try to bring it back to this, but in terms of these legends that happened around Los Angeles,
Yeah,
you do have this hotbed of political ideology that is real, that's in the city. Then you have the fear of the war, and things started to change. And when you're talking about this danger that you don't necessarily see for yourself, I do think that adds to local legends that come up, because
100%.
you find these ways to connect the things that you've heard about or read about, or, oh, I'm reading about the war and my brother went to war and oh, there's a place right there. Nazis are there. And it's like, I feel like it's all connected,
It's
so
like
to speak.
romanticizing
Yeah.
it to be able to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. You have
Yeah,
to kind of deal with it in a way. But yeah. All right. Good stuff, Curtis. Good
yeah,
stuff. Thank you
yeah.
for bearing with me on a relatively frantic episode. And I say frantic because I had to jump around with various topics. But it's been a fascinating subject to learn about. This episode took at least 2 or 3 complete 180 turns when I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about Nazis in LA. And then I've read about the spy ring and I'm like, well, shoot, I got to talk about the spy ring. And then I found out the Murphy Ranch wasn't actually for Nazis. And it's like, well, shoot, I didn't expect that. I thought there was a tie with Nazis. And so they kept making little turns, and that's fun. That's part of the fun of this kind of thing, is like
Yeah.
learning about this stuff.
And
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm grateful to find out that, first of all, not as many people were Nazis as originally intended.
Yeah. Yeah.
A little disappointed to find out that the Klan had so much so much activity. But it gets saved by the fact that there was an anti-Nazi
Yeah.
spy ring,
Yeah.
like constantly undermining, like
Yes.
vicious
It
attacks that
made
would
me
have been
think
awful.
of, is it an Amazon series?
The Hunters.
The Hunters. It made me think of The Hunters, but a more like grounded, real world example of The Hunters. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So we'll develop that,
We'll
and
develop
we'll
again.
sell
We
it.
own
We'll
all
sell
of
it to the
it.
Netflix
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
one of the other streamies.
Absolutely. I'm sure that it looks, the writer of that book probably sold the rights already, but just again, by us talking about it, we now own 20% at least.
All I'm
Whatever gets
saying
made.
is, it doesn't have to be the book. It's a historical thing that exists. It's a historical
Good
thing
point.
that
Good point.
exists.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Curtis. Where do you want people to find you? What do you want people to know? What's going on?
So the best places to find me at the moment are Instagram, even though Meta is Meta, and also on YouTube at Curtis Andersen, Andersen, where some of the shorts that we've been producing are going to be found, and it's just a nice place to be able to keep up.
And in case I have a large contingent of listeners in Portland, what about your store?
Oh, and of course, you can always visit me at Board Bard Games in beautiful downtown Montevilla in Portland, Oregon. We're right on Stark Street between Ranch Pizza and Tinker Tavern.
Nice. And now I want you to do like a mattress commercial, but for your store. Like when it's, for some reason, mattress companies always have the hokiest, weirdest commercials. That's what
Honest to
you
God,
gotta
you should go take a look at the store's Instagram account.
do. Oh,
We are known for during peak times, we do completely unhinged posts.
nice.
And for the holiday season, we did some particularly strong, like in the moment bits.
Good for
So, yeah.
you. Yeah, I will
Yeah.
check that out. I will definitely follow
All
you.
that
And I'll put
improv
it in the show
training
notes, too.
totally paid off.
There
So,
you go. There you go. Well, thank you so much, Curtis, for being on, and I will talk to you soon.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to A Study of Strange. Come find us on social media, on Instagram. Check out our website, astudyofstrange.com. Through the support tab, you can find more content and a way to support the show by joining our Substack. And please, if you haven't done so already, hit that follow or subscribe button and leave a rating or review. It goes a long way to helping others find our show. Thank you and good night.